And yours was? Mary Ann.
We're going to start in a second.
Ellen. Okay, if you want to say something, you have to hold it.
Yeah.
Have you stopped? Yeah.
Tonight's guest speaker is Terri Lynn. She's going to speak on tension, trauma, release exercise.
Thanks, Rick.
Please speak loudly because my hearing aids don't work.
Okay. I'll talk as loud as I can. I'm going to stay over here so I can move the screen and go through my presentation. So if you can't hear me, just say, hey, speak up. If I forget to
you
start
see that, then you know.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak. And thanks for creating this forum and platform for people to share information in the community. I'm really excited to be a part of it today. Is anybody here familiar with TRE, trauma release? Anyone heard of it until you saw the flyer? Yeah. Okay, great. It's still quite well. It's not new. This is something that's been worldwide for over 20 years. It's very new to our community. I had heard about trauma release through a colleague in Arizona. And I was quite intrigued when she had mentioned about how this trauma release exercise was really effective at releasing her psoas muscle. And that got my attention because I've been on a lifelong pursuit to find ways to address the psoas muscle because I was braced for scoliosis in my teenage years. And it was an idiopathic scoliosis, meaning there was no leg length difference or any kind of, malformations or anything from birth, so they didn't know why this was happening. And through chiropractic care and massage and other various modalities, I discovered how integral the psoas muscle is to alignment and to keeping the integrity of the pelvis and the structure of the being. I also discovered that the psoas muscle is on the kidney meridian. And the emotion associated on that meridian is fear. So there was a lot of pieces of the puzzle over the years. Now, the psoas muscle, and we'll get to that in the presentation, but it's quite deep in the body and it's hard to manipulate. If you ask your massage therapist to release your psoas muscle, she or he's gonna get it really deep into your abdomen, and sometimes it can be uncomfortable, depending on how tight that is and how comfortable you are with people poking you in the abdomen. So that's how I first discovered TRE. And I have the sort of personality where I don't just have a session. I go to the source of the person who developed it and take a training. So that's what I did. I went on the website and saw that Dr. David Fucile would be teaching a level 1 and 2 in Madison, Wisconsin in June. This was 2 years ago. So I inquired, and what was really interesting was I knew nothing about this other than it would release my psoas muscle. And the word trauma had me curious. And when I registered for the class, I had my first panic attack ever. It was the Virgo personality in me. Roger, there was...
There he is, I figured you'd come late.
I didn't even know who was on today.
He always goes for you first.
I couldn't figure out, how I was going to get around this. I'm really good at finding ways to, I find things that are healing, that are good for me, and then I also find clever ways around them so I don't really get to the root issue. And with this, all I knew about it was that we activate this tremor mechanism, that we surrender to this uncontrollable process, and that's what takes over and does the discharging. Well, how am I going to interfere with that? How am I going to be in control? And hence the panic attack. Was also how I knew that this was something that I needed to do, because that part of me, there was so much fear involved. And so I went to the training. I was quite relieved to find out on the first day that not only are we surrendering to an uncontrollable process, a big part of trauma release exercise is self-regulation. And so it's being in control of the uncontrollable process. So it's very much a dance, and this really spoke to the Aikido part of me. I studied Aikido for a number of years, so I felt like I was in familiar territory. And it was also very much in line with the principles of the Traeger approach, which I've been doing since 2009, which is somatic body work. And it's having a conversation with the unconscious mind through the tissue of the body. And this is very similar to that in that we're having an unconscious conversation, a very conscious conversation with the unconscious mind of the individual that I'm working with. So the image you see on the screen right now is of David Berselli. He's a social worker, he's a missionary, he's a trauma specialist. He actually spent time with Mother Teresa, which I discovered when I was there doing my training with him, and got to hear some lovely stories about that. Now, and he's also a massage therapist, body worker. He lived a number of years in the Middle East, and when he started his missionary work, he spent most of his time in areas that were at civil war or under natural disasters, that sort of thing, but mostly civil war areas. And he talks about a story one time when he was in Lebanon, when there was a lot of unrest, and how they would be in the bunker of the building when there was shells, hitting the building. And he speaks about a time where there was 8 of them in the basement from 6 different countries. And he noticed every time there was a loud noise, when something would hit the building, everybody would make this motion, right, this contracting motion. And that was one of his aha moments that, the way we respond to threat is not a cultural thing, it's a survival thing. And it was the same movement from everybody at precisely the same time. And he noticed another time when he was in Japan, how when they were all, the sirens went off and they all ran to safety, and everyone was told to grab a child, right? Grab the children and get to safety. So they were sitting again in this basement, and all of the adults had at least 1 or 2 children sitting on their lap. And he noticed that the children were shaking and the adults were not. And he was very curious about that. And that was another aha moment about this tremor mechanism and how we see it in children and animals. We see it in beings that aren't conditioned to go against, our natural response. And evolution is very wise, and this mechanism, like our body has the ability to go into a stress response and to fight or flight to be able to meet a danger. But evolution's not going to give us the ability to go into a heightened arousal state without also having the ability to come out of it. And that's how we accomplish that. The body will shake off discharge the excess energy. And we've all had that experience of shaking, whether we're nervous about speaking in front of a group, or we're standing at the altar, or we're being chased by something, or we're in a confrontation with someone who's very special to us, and there's a situation that's escalating and you notice you start shaking. That's the body's way of down-regulating. And so what David did was he came up with a series of exercises that fatigue the muscles that are involved in the stress response, the psoas being one of them, and some leg muscles and core muscles. And these are very simple exercises you've all seen in high school gym. They're not anything really exotic or very challenging at all. As a matter of fact, he jokes how when he teaches this to military, how they all kind of roll their eyes up. These aren't exercises, David. These are movements, because they are very, very simple in their execution. And so what that does is it creates, without the stressor, it creates the stress response without the stressor. And so then when the muscles start to tremor, then it's going to discharge the excess energy, the muscle tension. It has an effect on the vagus nerve. It has an effect on your nervous system. And we'll get to that more through the presentation. These are the 2 books that have been written to date. Shake It Off Naturally was just released this year, and it's a compilation of stories from practitioners around the world who use trauma release with themselves and with their community. And the book The Revolutionary Trauma Release Process was his first book. It has been translated in over 9 languages and is available worldwide. So the stress muscles. So like I said in the introduction, this is the fetal position. So the body's going to go into a stress response. It's going to protect the internal organs, the genitals, anything that's for our survival. And it does it very fast without thinking. When you hear a loud noise, your body responds first, and then you realize whether you're safe or whether you're in danger. The body, this is coming from the autonomic nervous system. So it's not from our prefrontal cortex, and we'll talk about that as well when we get to the brain section. So there's some images that we've all seen, whether it's after falling off a bike or a child who's emotionally upset. I'm not sure about the fellow at the bottom there, maybe just lost his job or something. I'm not sure what's happening there. So this is really interesting. So you see how it's not just the muscles here in the core. It actually goes right up into the jaw. And there's probably a few people in this room who are very aware of when they're stressed, how their jaw is clenched. Or you can feel up under the occipital ridge, a tension headache. Anybody get tension headaches? These are all connected through the fascia in the body. The psoas muscle, you can see, yeah. So the psoas muscles are right here, and we'll get to more detailed images in the next slide. So they connect right up into the diaphragm and the rib cage, also down to the, through the pelvis and into the adductor muscles. So the psoas connects the top part of the body to the lower part of the body. And as you can see, there's major muscle groups that are involved. So here's a close-up of the psoas muscle. And there it is again. So you can see there's layers of muscles on top. So getting at that psoas muscle can be very challenging. Restorative yoga is also another way that you can release the psoas muscle through various poses with props. So what causes the body to have that reaction, that response, comes from the autonomic nervous system, activating the low road. So I was saying the amygdala responds right away. We don't stop and think about the danger. It reacts right away. That's our survival that's at stake. It automatically pulls the body into a ball. But now here's the second part of the process. Relaxing the psoas muscle through the tremoring signals the brain that the threat is over. And so the brain stops sending chemicals and signals to the body that it's under threat. So it's a two-way system. Now I'm going to go to this video now of the polar bear.
We'll go for that one. Yeah, another pretty big bear. Another 8cc, or do you think, Dennis?
So you can see the bear's getting more and more aroused. He's very aware of the presence of the helicopter. This would be fight or flight mode, right? He's choosing to flee. And we've tranquilized him.
They're sort of like non-skid material, and it's all sort of rough, not really smooth. It helps them get better traction on the ice. Figure it up almost like a sandpaper. And then of course, big claws for ripping, breaking in the steel layers. But he hasn't started to really chip his teeth.
So now he's coming out of the freeze
You watch that
response.
animal after he finishes convulsing, you'll see, because he's aware of the fact that we're all around him, and it's a very stressful experience for an animal like a polar bear. And after he settles down, then he'll start doing a couple of deep breaths, and then he'll breathe really nicely. And there you go.
Watch his diaphragm.
See how he's breathing now?
So this is the bear down-regulating from the original threat, so that he can carry on with his life without a tension headache. I just love watching that diaphragm. Like, that is one deep breath.
So are you saying that's what a person would go through?
Yes, and I'll show a video of that next. This is a little girl. I don't like this one, and I'm going to show the end because the reason she had this response is because she's hunting with her father. So the gun went off, it was a loud noise, it triggered the response. And now she's going into, yeah.
Are you sure you're not cold?
Children, right? They just naturally, she's like, oh, I'm not worried my dad's going to think I'm weak or that I, you know, she's very curious. And the more curious you are, the more permission your body has to release.
And there's a bighorn sheep up on the hill. Right up there, but we can't shoot her.
It's just so cute. Okay, so now here it is in human.
Hi, Cal Bailey here. I'm here to talk to you about the experience I had with exercise. When I first got through that ego-driven portion of the exercises, I started to experience this trembling in my core. Like I started shaking uncontrollably in my core, which kind of felt good. It was a good releasing type movement, almost like a autonomic massage of my internal muscles that stabilize your body. And then it worked directly up into my shoulders, where I presumed that I had trauma stored. And at first it was just one shoulder, then it was both shoulders, and then it started to be my hips and my shoulders, and then it became this convulsing cord, which you saw in the video. It's interesting because what we put together is that my experience with the roadside IMD going off was that I was immature, I was facing this way, and I probably, when the blast went off, pulled over this way, which brings that one shoulder into it, and I start trembling. And then, as I breathed into the effect more, I started to have emotions come up with it, and memories, and what happened was it was almost like a gas escaping from my body. That's the only way I can describe it. And it was incredible. Something left. And I'm not sure exactly what it was, but the whole experience overall was incredible. When I got done, I was incredibly relaxed. I had some of the best sleep I've ever had. And again, put the ego aside and do this. You'll thank me forever.
So what you saw there with him, now that wasn't his first experience. Typically when people first start, when they first do the exercises and they activate that tremor mechanism, it'll take a few sessions to really get into, to establish that your body will start to trust you and accept that permission. And then you start moving into bigger movements. And so sometimes it'll be immediate after a stressor, you'll have the shaking release, but with this, you can artificially recreate without the stress part, just fatiguing those stress muscles, so that your body will start to find where those chronic patterns of tension are stored in the body and start to discharge them. And that could be everything from falling off a bike, when we were learning to ride our bike, to emotional things from lost love, or from being belittled by a grade 3 teacher, like physical, mental, emotional trauma. It addresses all of them. And the body doesn't make a distinction. And as a matter of fact, David Berselli doesn't make a distinction between body and mind, as well as I'm sure most people in this room would agree. And so he refers to us as a pulsating organism.
It's possible after or during a bombardment.
Can you repeat the question? Is it possible after doing a
To
bombardment?
have that tremors
Oh, after like,
after or during a bombardment.
oh, absolutely.
But that's
And
what I had, and I never realized what it was.
yeah, and most people don't. And it happens often. When I did my
I
training, there
couldn't
was a
stop
number of
shaking.
first responders there, and they said, oh my God, I had no idea. People all the time, when we respond to a fire or an accident scene, and they're shaking, and we put a blanket over them to settle them down. I had no idea that I was interfering with the very natural process. It's a very natural process. I hear from a number of women when they first have this experience at their first class, they say, oh, my body did this when I delivered my babies. It's very natural and normal. And the reason we don't see it so much is because we've pretty much conditioned it out, like he said, put our ego aside. For most of us, it's a sign of weakness. You don't want to let the boss see you sweat. You don't want to see him, look weak. Don't want to look vulnerable. And so on an individual level, but on a collective level as well, that's just what we've been taught as a society, that's not a healthy response for some. I mean, it's been pathologized, right? The tremoring is in a number of, a symptom for a number of disorders. And some of them are, very real, but some of them is probably the body trying to discharge that.
At first that really tremor, you can't stop.
Yeah.
And then after I finally slowed down, I started crying.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's very common with this as well.
I was 12 years old,
Yeah.
and I didn't know what the heck was happening. And later on, when the bombardments were there, and I was in them, I had it somewhat like that, but not that severe.
Not as severe, yeah. Well, yeah, that's very traumatic. And
Oh, it
that's,
was.
yeah, absolutely. And that's wonderful that you were able to, well, like you said, you couldn't stop it.
No,
Yeah.
I didn't know what was happening to me. My mom, she totally didn't know what's going on because none of them had it but me.
Oh, wow, interesting.
So, and I never actually thought of it anymore. Yeah, you know what happened, and that was about it. Why?
Yeah. Well, the emotional release, a big part of that discharge. And in some situations, we'll start to laugh. Same thing, just have, expelling that energy and moving that energy.
I was crying and crying, and it took an hour for me to stop. After the shaking.
And how did you feel after that, after the whole?
I'm tired.
Yes.
I fell asleep
Yes.
for about 3 or 4 hours.
Wonderful. And have you ever met a
Then I was
traumatized
hungry
person
like a
who can
horse.
sleep? Anybody meet a traumatized person who can sleep? Not usually. That's wonderful. Your body was able to rest and feel safe enough to be
Yeah.
able to, go unconscious and sleep. So these are some of the experts in the field. Dr. Peter Levine, he's the creator of the somatic experiencing. Dr. Robert Scare, and they're talking again about the animals and how they've all researched animals in relation to this phenomenon. This experiment was really interesting. So they took 3 groups of little ducklings, and none of them were harmed in this experiment, I've been assured. So there was a control group where the ducks weren't manipulated at all. They were just left alone. Then there was the second group. So how they were stimulated was they were held in the palm of the researcher's hand, like they were cupped. So they weren't being squished, but they were being contained. And so that was stressful for the little chicks. And they held them there and they wouldn't let them go. They held them for the entire experiment. This group, they held the chicks for about 2 minutes, and then they put them down and freed them so that they could have an experience. And they watched them, and they all fluttered their wings, and they shook, they did the tremor mechanism, right? Now, all 3 groups, they put into a basket of water. The group that was stimulated and not allowed to discharge actually started to sink. And they had to remove them. The control group that didn't have any containing or stress was able to swim, but for only for so long. The group who was contained and had the stress applied and then was allowed to discharge was actually stayed afloat longer and was stronger in how they were responding. And so from that, I take great comfort. That is a beautiful demonstration of post-traumatic growth. And David talks a lot about the evolution of our species and how that's how our species evolve, right? We don't evolve from avoiding trauma. We avoid from surviving trauma and from adapting and changing and growing, and that's what evolution is. And so with modern technology and society, there's a lot of, what's the word? I mean, there's things created to avoid being uncomfortable. It's like avoiding trauma, definitely, but avoiding discomfort of any sort. And it's, I often wonder what that's doing to us as a society. I see it really, especially with the children, and the lack of, quote, hardships. But it's inevitable. We're all going to face trauma at some point in our life. And so what this does, not only when you discharge trauma, it creates a larger container. It creates a more adaptable organism. And so when you are in a stressful situation, you're going to be able to cope that much better.
At first they thought it was maybe a convulsion. We had talked to a doctor.
It looked like it, absolutely, yeah. So did they test you when they saw
Yeah,
everything
they
was
said,
functioning
no,
normal?
it's not convulsion.
Yeah.
But I never got an answer on it, and what was it?
Right.
No.
And now here's your answer. So the stress response is supposed to be short, right? Where you're chased by a tiger, you go into fight or flight, you escape the situation, or you fight the tiger. Evolutionary, this is how we've come along. So then your body downregulates and you carry on with your life. But we don't live with tigers anymore. We live with in-laws. We live with 2-parent working families. We work very stressful jobs with traffic and commuting and technology and emails and texts and airplanes. It's a very different world than what our bodies were designed for. And so our stress response isn't short and then we carry on. We're under chronic stress daily. And so we're constantly in a stimulated, aroused state. And we weren't designed to be that way. And so does anybody ever have the experience, like it feels like they have the brakes on and the gas pedal? Like they're stopping and starting at the same time? I'm very familiar with that. So we're all familiar from high school science class with the autonomic nervous system. And the traditional theory is we have a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system, which is still true. But we always, or at least I was always taught to believe the sympathetic nervous system is when you're aroused, and the parasympathetic system is when you're at rest, when your body digests and heals. Is anyone here familiar with Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory? So the sympathetic nervous system is still holds true with the traditional model. However, with the parasympathetic nervous system, what he's seeing now, when an individual or a population is constantly in the sympathetic nervous system, chronically overstimulated and over-aroused, and it's not sustainable, they'll end up in the parasympathetic nervous system, but instead of in rest and digest, they're in a freeze or a mobile response. That could look like depression. That could look like lack of motivation. That can look like a number of illnesses. Fainting, like a dorsal response, could be like an anxiety attack where someone can't function. We saw in the polar bear was having a freeze response. There was another video there that I didn't show of, was it an antelope? Yeah, it says a cantaloupe. An antelope, and it was attacked by a leopard, and so it was playing dead. It's like a possum thing, right? The freeze response. And this generally will come from developmental trauma, right? There's two types of trauma, like you're in a car accident or a natural disaster. It's a big trauma. You often don't remember what happened as you're recovering. Sometimes you'll get that memory back. But then there's developmental trauma, which a young child in a crib crying for attention, and that attention doesn't come. The child can't fight. The child cannot flee. So the option the child has is to shut down for its own safety. And that would be called a dissociated state. And that's also a freeze immobilization response. And so stress doesn't just look like fight or flight. It doesn't just look like hyper-aroused. It can also look like I can't respond and I'm frozen. And I want you all stop and think about that when you're in what you perceive as a threatening situation. What is your go-to? Do you notice that you freeze and you can't respond, or do you notice that you want to run, you jolt and go? And it's a good thing to know about yourself, especially if you're going to take up a TRE practice, because you'll notice as you get deeper into your TRE practice, you'll bump into some larger traumas, and you're going to find that the body's going to respond by going into fight or flight or going into a dissociated state. When this chart was explained to me, I felt so validated. This is when I knew that I would be not only doing TRE for myself, but sharing it with my community. So this is the same model we just looked at on the previous page. So here's our baseline. This is happy, everyday, social engagement, rest and digest. Then we bump into somebody and we're irritated and frustrated, or we have an exam coming up, or a job interview, we're anxious and worried. So that puts us into a sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so down here is parasympathetic, up here is parasympathetic, and here is sympathetic. So this is everything from frustration to rage, worry to panic. Now if you're, again, it should be short. So you have this frustration, you get through your job interview, your curve comes back down and you're back into your baseline. But if you're stimulated every day and you have someone aggravating you every day, you're constantly angry or you're constantly afraid for your life, and you come up into this area, which is a dissociated state, when you come back down that curve, this is what you're going to bump into: panic and rage. That's terrifying. Up here it's numb. Has anybody here been told, oh, you're so peaceful, I was told this. You're so peaceful, I just love to be around you, your energy's so nice. I was living up here, so I wasn't threatening to anyone, energetically or otherwise. And every time I would go to do a mindfulness meditation, and I'd start to come back down here, this is why there were so many thoughts in my head. That was a safety mechanism. That was survival. That was my brain's way of keeping me from going into here, because it needed to distract me from going into here because I was going to go into this frightening area. So what happens is, yikes, that's frightening. So we come back up into dissociated state. And then we try again to relax and settle. And then we come into that. And we come back up. And so this is where I got really hopeful. Now with TRE, when I came through here, I had the tools to come through there, and I had the support, I had the context and understanding. And I was working with someone who also had the context and understanding and could safely guide me through there so that I can come back and live in a healthier state. The triune brain. So like we were talking about, this is the brain stem. Down here we also notice the reptilian brain. So that's autonomic nervous system. That's what regulates your breathing and your heartbeat. You don't have to think, do I want to be alive today? And I'm going to sit and focus on my heart beating and how many breaths I take in a minute. It's automatic. It just does that for you. Limbic system is where your emotions live. And your cortex, neocortex, is where logical thought is and where we focus from. When you're in a stressful situation, you're walking down the road and you see a stick, but you don't know it's a stick, you think it's a snake. Right away you have a response or a reaction, because this is much more fast processing, because this is your survival. Well then 2 seconds later, and they've actually clocked this, it's 2 seconds, this comes on, the cortex, and you realize that's not a snake, that's a stick. Now you can laugh it off and, okay, well, I don't have to run from the stick. I'm not in danger. But what's interesting is the cortex is turned off. For that 2 seconds, this is the only 2 parts of the brain that are working. So again, when you're in a chronic, stressful situation, whether it's an abusive relationship, a job that has a lot of duress, whatever the story is, the more you live in here, the less this is online. So the harder it is with memory, with focusing, with getting tasks done, carrying on a conversation. I'm going to go back up to this now. When we do trauma release exercise, the part of the brain that's addressed is the brain stem. We're working with the autonomic nervous system. So where the trauma is stored, we can go to a therapist. That's something I highly recommend. And when you go for therapy, you're going to address, you're going to talk, you're going to tell your story. My boss did this, and I la 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 la. You get it out, you can look at, get a perspective on, process the emotions. But what's not addressed is here, in the brain stem and the nervous system, and the issues that are in your tissues. And this is the missing piece that the trauma release addresses, what therapy and talk therapy and journaling and these sorts of things can't get at, but are a lovely complement too. I mentioned earlier about the myofascia. You may know it as a connective tissue as well. I did not know this. I was quite intrigued when I found out that the nervous system receives its greatest amount of sensory input from our myofascial tissues. That's huge. I always thought it was from my ears and my vision, and right, and those are true as well. But the myofascial tissue is a big communicator in the body. So this is what the tissue myofascia looks like, and it's around every muscle in the body. It's around all the organs, but it's also around groupings. So it'll be around the digestive system, through the chest cavity, around the pelvis. And there's also myofascial trains. So anyone that's had structural integration would be familiar with the myofascial trains. So there's also larger webs that'll connect, like the whole left side of the body, or the entire arm or limb. So when you get an injury or bruise to the arm, now that's going to have an impact on that whole myofascial train, not just locally. And so that's where a lot of that information comes from. Now this is really interesting too. Connective tissue contracts by social or psycho-emotional stress, even without the influence of the muscle. So you don't even have to go into a stress response for the myofascial tissue to respond to a stressful situation. And it secretes inflammatory substances, just what we all need, more inflammation. Fascia molds itself over time, according to how the body is used. If a person habitually sits in a slouched position, over time the fascia will mold itself into that position. Now again with the scoliosis, I wasn't sitting in any kind of odd positions, but whatever emotional stressor there was that contracted the psoas muscle, a big part of that was the fascia that was holding that into that position until it became the way my body sat. Now there's liquid in the myofascial tissue, and so when that's uncontracted, when that's released, that fluid actually delivers waste to the lymphatic so that can be carried out. So it's really important to get the lymphatic tissue, the myofascial tissue released, and there's a lot of ways to do that. Structural integration, one, and deep connective tissue work, but TRE also will create fascial unwinding. So some cautions. This is about self-regulating. Again, we're not doing the class tonight. This is something that I would address before having you do the exercises and get on the floor to do your shaking. But like we'd said in the earlier slide, the freezing and the flooding and the dissociating, it's good to know what your primary is in the threat of danger. And how that might show up for you. Freezing is, well, like it sounds, when you're immobilized. Flooding, a big release of emotions, which a lot of people can manage, but when the emotions, so that, like when you were talking about how you cried after your experience, it probably felt really good to just get all of that out. But sometimes when somebody goes into an emotional response, that can be overwhelming and more than the system can handle. And in that case, that's when you want to self-regulate. You don't want to re-traumatize the system. And there are some approaches that you push through it till you get to the other side. This is not one of those. Because it's important to not overwhelm. The system is already overwhelmed. We're trying to take the system out of overwhelm. So to force it is just going to re-traumatize. So it's important that if you're to do this practice, that you titrate your experience. So if you find that you're getting uncomfortable mentally, emotionally, or physically, that what that means is that the process worked. You've resurfaced or resurrected that trauma. And so now you would go and journal about it, or you would have a good cry, or you would go and paint, or you would call a friend and talk, or see your therapist. Some people don't need to do that. Some people could, during the shaking, they notice that they're having this response, and they're able to contain it. And so depending on what kind of trauma you're bumping into. And that's when it's good to work with a trained TRE provider. I find that, like, I do my own practice, but I also work with a mentor. And so when I do my own tremoring at home, I have a wonderful experience. When I tremor with a group or with my practitioner, I'm able to go much deeper, and I'm able to discharge and release things that I would not have been able to get at on my own, just because the group creates a larger container and more of a sense of safety, and the organism is more likely to let go and to release, especially if you're working on larger collective patterns. So there are some people that it's best not to engage. That being said, some of these actually are okay when you're with a provider. Pregnancy being one of them. I've worked with pregnant women This is very powerful. It's not recommended that it's something that you do every day. 2 or 3 times a week is plenty. About 15 minutes is all you need. A number of times people get really excited about it and their body will be shaking and it feels so wonderful and they want to keep going and they do. And then the next day, they don't feel so good. And that's part of the self-regulating. It may feel, it's like drinking, right? I feel fine now, but tomorrow your body tells you a different story, right? So similar in that regard, where titrating the experience and less is more is really important with this.
So what do you take them back into past experiences of their own mind?
Yes, and the lovely thing about this is you don't have to figure out what those are. When you lay down and you start to tremor, the tremor mechanism will find where the tension is, where that's stored in the body. And sometimes you'll get images, sometimes you'll get an idea of what it is, especially if your body goes into really interesting positions. And actually I'm going to show you a video that demonstrates that. This one here, it's really interesting.
Great, I'm Adam McCabe. I am a former sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. I spent 2 years overseas in a combat zone. I've been awarded the Purple Heart. I've been awarded several accommodations for bravery in combat. I taught urban warfare. I kicked indoors for a living. And when I came across TRE, I was slightly skeptical, and then I experienced it. And it has been a tool that I've utilized over the years. It has helped me on my journey and helped further me on my journey. And really it's opened me up to a lot of different things that prior to I wouldn't have thought twice about. What TRE does for me is I use it as a self-regulating tool. If I'm feeling frustrated and stressed and I don't have a place for it, I use TRE to help discharge that. I do that. I can do it on a daily basis if I need to. And then I also use TRE for deeper stuff, for trauma that has been stuck in my body for a long time. Deep stuff that continues to shock me, how deep it is and where it came from. And I really see it telling a story of the history of some of the traumatic events I've been through. And it's crazy because it's not cognitive at all. My body is doing it regardless of what my mind is doing. My body is telling the story. So it keeps me excited and curious, and it is really loosening my body, opening up my heart in new ways. It's helped transforming me, most certainly. So for me, one of the most challenging things of the last few sessions and most significant for me is the way my body is telling the story of my trauma. So my body told that story. You know, as you kick in a door, as you kick in anything, what is happening in my body is my left leg is locked out straight. And it was locked and it was solid and shaking. And my right leg, completely involuntarily, would just raise to my chest and lock, and taking these positions that I'm just all too familiar with. And it's insane to me because I couldn't predict that it was going to happen. I didn't know that it was going to happen, and it happened without my willing it to do so. I mean, it was completely involuntary. I was along for the ride in that sense. And so what you'll see in the picture is my left leg being straight and my right knee coming up near my chest. And, you know, if you're going through a door, you know, you are, and this is the motion that I kept getting stuck in. Right before I slam my heel through this door, my knee comes up and I'm getting ready to extend with all my might through the door. And again, real life, as is happening, that's the scariest second in the world. And the body tells a story. Left leg straight, arching my back, knee up, getting ready to explode through a door. You know I went through the experience, but I didn't know. I know that it came home with me in my head and my heart, but I didn't know that my body kept all of that fear and trauma and anxiety, and it's absolutely crazy for me and shocking to look back over the video and to experience my body trying to discharge that. It's working.
I'll just answer your question. So yes, and my experience has been, I still have the scoliosis. That's a much deeper pattern. I have worked through, took about 9 months of regular tremoring and just surface tension and day-to-day stuff, and then I noticed I was bumping into something larger. I noticed that I didn't want to tremor. When I did, I could only do it for about a minute or two and I'd get tired or I'd feel panicky. And so I realized that I was moving into something that that I would need help in containing, that my body didn't feel like I had its back. Right? And so that's when I worked with the trainer. And what I moved through was the traumatic birth of my twins, when I coded on the table. And so I thought all this time when I was attempting to move through this on my own that I had a fear of death. I thought I was, because when I delivered the kids, my second, I hemorrhaged and coded on the table. So I thought, well, geez, you know, the body will take you back into the contracted state of the trauma. And so that's probably not wise for me to do on my own, because I'm thinking I've got this fear of dying. And so when I was at the advanced training with Dr. Fucile, and there was a group of 40 advanced practitioners, and we all showed up with our deep wounds, you know, ready to work through those. It was about 3 days that it took with the support to move through it, and it was really interesting watching how my body could really relax into and trust and open up in a way that it couldn't do on my own. And it was quite surprising, actually, when it wasn't the fear of death that was the trauma, it was I was really pissed off about coming back. Yeah, so there was, when I came back into my body, like while I was tremoring and felt myself, the practitioner said, I'd really like to touch your feet. I feel like I want to hold your feet. And as she did, I felt the denseness of being in my body, and I realized just how much of me was out of my body, had left during that experience, that traumatic experience, and had never returned. There was a big part of me living outside of my body. And so when I felt myself come back in, and there was so much more of me in my body, what accompanied that was extreme anger, which really surprised me. I was expecting to be relieved. So you just never know what's going to show up. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't want to face the anger of the past.
Yeah, I understand that.
I don't want to go back there, you know, like
I understand that.
right from the time starting school issue to dealing with the government. It just beats you down, and you think, well, I'll just try to avoid this now, and I got to get in my own little world and push away from that, which is safer. You know, you don't want to get in the ringer again.
It feels safer, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But when we push away the anger, it doesn't go anywhere, it's still there. We're just not facing it, but it's still there.
So what did you do with your anger when you found, like, when
It,
it came up?
it expressed, it came out, like I banged my feet and I screamed and hollered and whatnot. That's when I realized I needed to get a new office, because the office that I was in probably wasn't going to support that kind of practice. But it wasn't as frightening as it wasn't what I was expecting it would be. And what I learned was expressing anger is just as detrimental as suppressing anger. It's about releasing anger and expressing anger are two different things. And that's what I really came to understand having that experience. That all this time, every time that I was upset about something, I was quick to voice it because I wasn't going to suppress my anger. I was going to let it be known. And so I thought, well, geez, so why am I still so angry? Because I've expressed it. And what I did was I was perpetuating it. I was not releasing it by giving it a voice. And so when I got out of the way and allowed the intelligence of my body and to move that, when I felt it come up, okay, you know what it felt like? It felt like a burp. Anytime I have emotion come up with trauma release, that's how it feels. When you feel like there's some gas and it's moving and you're expecting this great big roar, and it's just like, it's just a, it's really wasn't explosive. And I felt it, and the key is, this is part of self-regulating. The key is to be able to observe it. To observe it and let it have its space, and let it be there. And if you find that it's arising and you can't be with it, you can't observe it, you're starting to feel angry instead of observing anger, then that's when you would stop the process. Remember, this isn't something we're giving into an uncontrollable process. We are, but we're in control of it. And so it's the first thing I teach when I teach the exercises is how to stop the process, so that you can titrate that experience and you can decide how quickly or slowly you want to move through discharging that experience and that trauma. You're in control the whole time. And I can speak from personal experience that my life has been much different since moving that. And I'm sure there's a lot more that can go. But it made a difference in my energy levels. It made a difference in my relationships. It made a difference in how I perceived my children and how I related to them. It made a difference in some physical, medical issues that I was having. So it was pretty life-changing. Thank you for your question, and that's most of us. And it's the resistance that creates the sense of struggle. It's not the anger that's the issue, it's the resistance that is the bigger problem. Yeah.
I know according to physiology, when you are stressed out by a shock or blast or something, you have an adrenaline rush.
Yes.
And it can be very extreme. As any hunter who has first started hunting knows, that adrenaline rush ingrains in your memory a very strong memory, as opposed to if you're just trucking along, nothing's happening. You get some memories, but when the adrenaline hits you, that memory is very, very intense.
Yes.
And it's captured into your body.
Yes.
So that memory is constantly there in your body because of the adrenaline that was caused by whatever stress caused it.
Absolutely.
And so whenever you are thinking about it, you're reliving that same emotional stress, reinforcing it,
Yes.
as you said.
Yeah.
So that's why you're talking about being angry,
Yeah.
because every time you relive that particular episode, it makes you more stressed again, gives you more adrenaline, reinforcing that pattern. So it's in your body.
Absolutely, and some people would say that it's an addiction. that was certainly my
Like adrenaline junkies, you jump out of planes all the time.
absolutely,
Like
yeah. And you don't have to jump out of planes to be addicted to adrenaline.
Yeah.
I lived on adrenaline as a single parent of twins, and it was just, I was in survival mode for 12 years. And Diane can relate to that. And so when I started to come out of that, yeah, it was bumpy. It was bumpy because my body, well, first of all, it's not sustainable to live off adrenaline. Because when that runs out, like, it's your blood sugar that's, you know, got to catch that. And so I was running into all kinds of metabolic issues. And this showed up just in the nick of time for me.
Basically, you're defusing this pattern that has been reinforced from the initial trauma.
Absolutely. And now some people might look at that and say, well, was it the initial trauma, or was this a pattern from lifetimes, right, that's recreated? So there's that opportunity as well. You know, we're cleaning up a specific trauma, a particular point in time, but we could also be addressing, if there's nodal points along that we could be addressing and clearing at much deeper levels for ourselves and for the collective.
There's a similar pattern, a little bit different, but it's called tissue memory or body memory.
Yeah.
Where people who have had transplants from other people all of a sudden accumulate these traits that that other person had from the tissue that was transplanted to them.
Absolutely.
An example would be this one fellow, he died he was a cyclist, he died in an accident. This lady got his heart, and she had a tremendous urge to go have Kentucky Fried Chicken. And she didn't know why. She never ate it before. She was like, I would never eat that, but why would I want it now?
Yeah.
So when she went to the parents of the person who donated the heart, found out that this guy loved Kentucky Fried Chicken. So it's a memory in the cells that carried over into her. But I mean, the same thing is happening here, I would suspect, where the memory of the cells has ingrained that pattern.
Absolutely. Yeah, at a physical level, we could look at it at an energetic level as well. Patterns of light information, and where we get blockages in our energy field. I mean, it's translated. This is, well, I'm trying to remember what part of the video, when the Navy SEAL was speaking, and he said, something left me. I don't know what it was, but something left me. And I thought, oh, it's funny because it's called trauma release exercise. And some people, when they see the people shaking like that, they're, is that exercise or is that an exorcism? Right, because it's what it looks like. And so I asked David the last time I had a session with him. I brought that up, and he chuckled, and he said he hears that often. I said, well, you know, like, I'm thinking there's probably some validity to that. Energetically, things shifting and clearing and moving, thought forms and patterns and such. Yeah, there's a lot more than just the nervous system discharging. But that's not part of the presentation, but as far as my experience goes and what I've seen and experienced, this is not just a physical release.
Because when you suffered some extreme anxiety over certain situations, and I found myself thinking, my mind going back over it, and I just find myself laying there at night trying to sleep, and it's a load into your head, and all of a sudden you find yourself just shaking and tense, you know, like, and I don't know, I guess that is that sort of normal deprogramming to...
Yeah, well, your body's responding because you're getting into an aroused state, and so your body's responding by...
Must peak your blood pressure off the top.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and so when you notice that shaking, allow your body to shake, and you'll notice it'll be harder to access those thoughts after your body's able to shake.
I did notice that, now that you mention it, yes. Yeah, weird.
Yeah, and that's your body looking out for you, taking care of you. And again, there's no difference between body and mind, right? Again, it's a pulsating organism. And you know, I think of that bear, and I'm like, yeah, he's not going to have any tension headaches, and he's not going to be worried about when's the next helicopter coming.
He might have a hangover.
Right, yes.
Drug.
But you know, I think a lot of us hold on because we've got this idea that this was a danger before, and so I need to be guarded and hyper-vigilant so that it doesn't happen to me again. But what that does, actually, it takes us out of the present moment. We're actually less able to meet another encounter because we're so guarded. It's really backwards the way and it's our mind that's fooling us into believing that. And when we can get out of the way and trust that our body knows what it needs to do, because we discharge the trauma, but we keep the wisdom. I'm sure the next time that bear sees a helicopter, it's going to remember that experience and, you know, maybe run a different way. And it's an integration process. And so we don't lose the experience, we just lose the charge around it. And so we can remember that experience maybe a little more fondly. Any more questions? Or stories about when they...
So how do you start when you start with a person? Like, do you start to ask them what their life was about, or you just...
I've got a short intake form just so that I know some details as far as risk factors go, but it's not necessary for the individual to share their story or their trauma, especially if they're not willing or ready to talk about it.
So you just have a basic picture of where they are just from the little questions you ask them, and you...
Yeah, and I can feel it. I can feel
sort
where
of
people are at too. Yeah.
tiptoe around it, yeah.
And that's why I keep the groups small. When I run a class, there's a maximum of 6 people when we do a group session, because I'm tracking everybody individually. And so if I had a large group, I wouldn't be able to contain that or to be able to manage that. So as a group, I find group classes to be very effective, and because they're small, you still get an individual attention, where the personal or private sessions are useful. If you feel like you've, well, if you're shy about crying, most people don't cry the first time they tremor. But the deeper you get into your process and the more comfortable you are moving, then, you know, you could cry or laugh or grunt. When I went through that birth thing, boy, I was grunting. And I wasn't the only one. There was lots of, it was really, I'm sure that people walking by that, you know, conference hall must have wondered what was going on in there. But so with people's comfort level, you know, with being, you know, in a group setting and feeling vulnerable, then some people prefer to have a private session. Or, you know, someone who's has a history of abuse or has been to war and has severe PTSD, then I recommend that they come for private sessions as opposed to the group setting. And so how we do, and this is the beauty, you know, this is how this was born, was David realized when he's in this region where there's a large population of traumatized people. You know, at home, people have the option of going to see a therapist or going and having a massage or structural integration. But here, there was no resources for that. And so he was trying to come up with a way that he can empower the community to do this together and for themselves. And that's where this was born from. That's why I love to do this in community and do it as a group, especially, you know, when collective patterns start to come up that we can address together.
So I imagine it'd be a lot more helpful in somebody that's just recently went through trauma, like that are really traumatized by something, or something more from the past. Like,
oh, both.
Yeah.
Both.
But I'm just saying, does it, how dramatically does it help a person that's just went through all this trauma and is trying to?
I see what you're
yeah.
saying.
How have you noticed the difference in what they've said from the major trauma they went through, like, you know, just either bad medical stuff or bad family relations or, you know, abuse situations right at the time? Do you find it's helping them real quickly, like the majority of people?
It depends on the individual and what their resistance level is. Like, I've had people come in who have a regular yoga practice, they've been going for massage and chiropractic all their life, they do journaling and all these things, so they're already very open and they've explored and done a lot of work. And so that tremor mechanism is activated really quickly in them, and they, you know, within 3 months are deep into a practice. And then there's some people who are very new to the world of somatic work, and they have a lot of reservations, but they want to sleep again, and they want to be able to cry again. They want to be able to relate to their spouses or their family again. And so they're a little slower to make that connection. And not always, actually that's what I've noticed, but I don't want to generalize that either.
Well, I've noticed, like, okay, one of the other fellows that he just died a little while ago that helped start this group, he fought for Hitler in the Second World War. And he says the people that did not leave it there and go on with their life today, it killed them. And it did them in after a while. You know, he died of old age, and he told me some of his stories. He took me aside and told me some of the bad things that did happen to him. He says, but the people that couldn't shut it off, live in today, shut that off as a different part of their life, they didn't survive, you know, like.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because how many people have been told, have you heard, you should just let that go?
How do you
It drives me nuts
how
when
do you
people tell
do
me I
that?
should let that go. Like, do you think if I could have let this go,
Yeah.
I would have?
Yeah, exactly.
I would have done it a long time ago, and you know, I want that peace. And so the beauty of this process is that you don't have to let it go. It lets go of you. When you really get out of the way and trust in the process and trust that it's going to move that, it does, it really truly does, it lets go of you.
Two questions. First one, you got acupuncture, and they deal with the energy flow lines in the body.
Yes.
And is there a difference if you were to bring that person to an acupuncturist and you could test all the points of your body, see where the blockages would be? You would do your treatment and then have the acupuncturist retreat and see what has been cleared. Would that be?
I love that. That's a great experiment. I go for acupuncture once a week, and I hadn't thought of doing that. And
Theoretically, you would think that would
yeah,
work, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Number two was, you watch a really, really funny movie. You sit there bent over, slapping your knee, crying, and it's a similar response to that. Seeing here, where you're actually crying, you're laughing till you're crying, you're bent over laughing, and you're
Yeah.
getting all this serotonin rush.
It's still an arousal
And
state.
it's very, very similar. It's
Yes.
very similar.
I'm glad you brought that up. Well, it's just like the tremoring when you're standing at the wedding altar, right? It's not just frightening, stressful situations. I remember a time when I was still feeling very, I wasn't using the word vulnerable, but I was in recovery, and I took my kids to see a Disney movie. I was overstimulated. I had to leave the theater. It was too stimulating for me, but because I was in such a raw state. That was too much for my sensitive system at the time. Yeah. So yeah, good point. It's not just.
I heard something today. I heard something today. My friend Rick, he went into the copy shop. Now Rick's under stress all the time. He went in to get his toner cartridge filled. That was at the inkjet place. And he said all of a sudden the guy left and he went and he's here smashing and screaming and yelling down the basement. And he thought, what is it? Somebody get beat up? Somebody come in the back door? Tell him your story, Rick. Yeah. And he says all of a sudden he didn't know what to do. Run outside and he says the guy come running upstairs and the ink cartridge, something blew up and he had black all over his face. He laughed all day. He was laughing. That was a good release for him there.
That was a great release.
Makes up for the whole week, eh?
Oh, that's wonderful. And laughing is such a wonderful diaphragm release. I'll never forget the day. For the first 3 months of my practice, it was just my legs that tremored. I didn't get any movement up through my trunk or into my neck or arms or anything. It was just my legs. And so my trainer and I did an intervention, and the tremors started to move up my core. And when they got to my diaphragm, and I had this huge diaphragm release, oh my God, the laughter, the tears. And you know when your tummy hurts from laughing so much? It was one of those. Oh boy, did I sleep good that night. Yeah. Laughter's a great release, yeah.
A story to share. A couple years ago, I got to do shamanic breathwork session.
Yep.
Wow, talk about releasing. I guess it's kind of similar in the level of release that you do. And my experience with the breath work was, like, I think there was about 10 of us in the class going through it, and there was lots of different experiences happening in the room. But for me, I couldn't stop laughing. I was like 2 hours of diaphragm release. I don't know from what, but I was crying a lot too, but major laughing. And I guess I needed to release all of that up there. Anyways, it was.
How did you feel after that experience? What did you notice?
I was exhausted.
Yeah.
I was absolutely exhausted, just absolutely exhausted.
Yeah, and that's what your experience was after all that crying. Yeah. We call it exhausted, but we
It was
could
a
also
good
look at it as like deep rest.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot of movement, for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It takes energy to hold all that energy.
Oh, yeah.
Once you let it go, you're relaxed.
Yeah, absolutely.
My mom didn't know what to do. She kept getting cold water on my hand, on my wrists and everything. You know, nobody else had it alone, eh?
And were you the youngest, or did you have any younger siblings?
I
You were
was
the
the only
youngest.
girl, 12 years old,
Yeah.
and the first bombardment when they started. And then you could hear the bombs coming closer. Every time another explosion, another one closer, and it was, next one is for us.
Yeah.
There was a mortar that exploded. Did not explode, you know, upstairs. It wasn't our time yet. But the bombing stopped. But it took me, well, until the bombing stopped, kind of, that I stopped shaking. And I never realized what it was.
Adrenaline.
Yeah, just tremors. And
Capturing
I
that
thought it was
energy.
a convulsion or something. My mom was worried. Mom told me she's got this convulsion.
Right. Yeah, I know your body was just trying to settle you down.
Something so unknown, such a peaceful life, and then all of a sudden, bingo, that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you hear the bombs and the planes going over, you hear the shooting, and then the bombs started to explode closer, 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 and all of a sudden, I don't know. I can't explain it really what happened. And another thing, what still is with me, the planes would come over and then they come down for unloading the bombs.
Yeah.
I was in training for a nurse, and I was in Fort William, walking with my friends. And one of those planes came over, and it was what you call a stallion, this one. Anyhow, those fast ones, and they make that sound. That,
oh, yes.
And I couldn't breathe. I just froze.
Yeah.
And then I had to sit down right on the sidewalk, and the girls, they all looked at me like, you know. And I never had it again. It was a
Yes, you
weird.
Did you hear the
Yes,
language?
you did. When those, used to have those air raid sirens, when they went off, you'd go white.
Yeah.
You just freeze and go white.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So did you hear the language
That's
she
what we
used,
did.
though? She said, I just froze.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that would
Totally.
be the freeze stick.
And my
at the top.
shoulders went up, and I started shaking, and I couldn't speak, and my girls, they didn't know what to do with me, you know.
They didn't need to do anything with you. Your body was doing it all for you.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
so.
All they have to do is understand what's
But
going on.
so many years after, it was in 1940, you know, 40, 45. And this was in what was it, when I was in training, a long time ago.
70.
Yeah, in the 70s, 69.
So,
Yeah. So it's kind of weird, but suddenly, you don't know why,
It's the most natural thing in the world.
I guess so.
Yeah, yeah.
does your,
And you were the youngest, you know, you were female.
Oh, yeah.
So everybody else in the family, you know, they would have contained that, you know, they wouldn't have allowed themselves to.
Yeah, I guess so.
does the blood pressure increase when they're all shaking, or is it the anticipation of, like, holding it in seems to make your blood pressure increase? Does that shaking and that tremor, does that take away from just letting your blood pressure increase? Like, you know, you can be sitting there so calm and so upset, and your blood pressure can peak right off, you know, like you're just sitting there. But I was just wondering if they
I
had.
think like if you were in a real situation where you were stressed and your blood pressure was up and you did the tremoring, it would come back down.
That's what I was thinking, maybe it stabilizes everything.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I've checked my blood sugar or blood pressure when I've done the tremoring, and it goes up. Like when I'm doing it artificially, I'm not in a stress situation. I've done a baseline, done the tremoring, checked my blood pressure, and it was up. Not racing up, but because I'm not in great shape, so it doesn't take much to get my blood pressure up from the exercises and the tremoring, and then it comes right back down again.
Question with the, two of the videos that we saw of the soldiers, I guess it was in the first one, when he was doing his tremoring, but then he also had a guttural sound coming out of him. Is that any different? Does it mean anything different? Is it?
That was part of the trauma. When he was sent flying from the tank and had the wind knocked out of him. So when you do the tremoring and you bump into the trauma, your body goes into the contracted state of the trauma. It will take you into that state in order to discharge it. And that's why most people are frightened to go there, because they don't want to relive the trauma. But you don't relive it to the full magnitude. You can see how he had that response, and he was like this, and same thing with me. I was grunting and such. That was part of the trauma. Sometimes people start laughing, and I think they're having a diaphragm release, and then I look closer and I realize the laughing is actually part of their trauma. If they were in a situation where they were being bullied or chastised and they laughed it off, if that shows up in a session, that laughter, and you can tell the difference between a diaphragm release and laughing is part of the original trauma. So all kinds of different movements, body sounds, and things that can show up.
They wouldn't go into a cramp.
It won't feel like a cramp, but it can look like a cramp. Like when the second soldier had his knee up into his chest, and he wasn't in any pain or discomfort. But it sure looked like he was. But no, you're quite. Yeah, and if you do feel any discomfort, then you would stop and then come back to it and just take a little bit bite-sized from it. Yes.
When you're talking about like group sessions or individual sessions, is this something where if you started into it would be a lifelong practice, or would you do it until like you've released your trauma and then you don't need to do it anymore, or?
Both. That would be entirely up to the individual.
Okay.
I find that as long as I'm on the planet, there's tension and trauma. That's the world I live in. That might not be everybody's experience. I find that this is probably something I'll do lifelong, just because it feels so good, and because it's a natural mechanism. It's not a modality or a technique that I'm doing. We're establishing a mechanism that is innate to us that we've suppressed and forgotten about. So once that's enlivened, and the permission is there for that to show up, so my practice may not be as regular when I get to a place where I feel like I've cleared out a light, like when I get, like David just walks into a room and the whole room is peaceful. Just his presence, because he's been doing this for 30 years, and he's worked with thousands of people, and he's come to an incredible place, and he still has a tremoring practice, but it's probably not, a regular thing. It's just when he notices that there's some tension, and he knows how to discharge it.
So if I was to go to a group session, what would I expect from start to finish?
Good question. Good question. The first 10 or 15 minutes, I would talk a little bit, like I did at the beginning of this presentation, about David and how this process began. And I would talk about self-regulation and what to be aware of in your body and what to watch for. Then I would invite you to participate in the 7 exercises along with me. I would demonstrate those and walk you through them. And then you would get onto your mat and wait for the tremor mechanism to activate in your body. You have cushions and blankets and props, or you can just lay there on your, however you would set yourself up for a yoga class is how you would set yourself up for a TRE session. I would have the lamps on, there's no fluorescent lighting or anything, you know, above your head. And you would just relax and be curious and notice what your body, how your body responds.
Is there like a guided meditation kind of thing to guide you into whatever state you're gonna?
No.
Not like that?
No. As little guiding as possible. I guide you through the exercises to make sure, for safety reasons, that everyone's doing the exercises correctly and they're not injuring themselves. And also just how to get the most out of the exercises and explaining what muscles we're fatiguing, why we're fatiguing them. There's more talk about self-regulation during that process as well. But once you get on the floor, I'm not guiding anything. It's your body that's guiding. And some people are more accustomed to that than others. And so sometimes they'll be guiding and how to not be guided, or, you know, so there's a lot of inward focus. And so I'm encouraging everyone to pay attention to their body and, you know, what to notice. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, then I turn off I start some music for the, you know, 10 or 15 minutes, then the music's off, and we just lay and integrate, and then we sit up and share if we feel compelled to share or ask questions. And then we're done. I make sure before anyone leaves that they're all present and in their body. And because when you do this process, you're inviting trauma to surface. And so if you have a tendency to dissociate under stress, that can happen during the process and you wouldn't even be aware of it. But I'm trained to be aware of that. And so that's why I engage in conversation at the end and make sure that everyone is very aware and present so that when they're leaving, they're in an alpha state and not off in their trauma. And I want to talk about the concept of titration a little bit more. I wasn't crazy about science in high school, so I don't have this experience firsthand. But in science class, you know, when you have the beakers of the corrosive material and you pour from one beaker into the other, and you have this big explosion. So, you know, the teacher has to keep these substances locked in this cabinet and these over here because the kids all want to make explosions. And so if you have this one substance, instead of pouring it in and getting an explosion, you put it in a little eyedropper and you just put one drop in and you get a little fizz. And then you put another drop in and you get another, so a smaller chemical reaction, but not an explosion. And once you've emptied the entire amount of contents from this solution into this beaker, and you've had a series of little reactions, at the end, the final solution is saline water. It's a neutral state. But if we poured it all in at once, it would have been an explosion. So this is the concept of titrating. So when you're doing this work, you don't need to, and again, this was a big lesson for me because that's my personality. This is why I went, you know, and studied with David, because, oh, this is something good and I have to, you know, do it now and heal myself, and, you know, I dive in head first and I go for it all the way. And I thought baby steps were for wussies. And so that was a very humbling, important lesson for me. Baby steps is what titrating is. And, you know, that story of the tortoise and the hare. I mean, there's all kinds of parables and stories that speaks to the wisdom of, you know, take your time and integrate. It's a journey, it's a process, and it took 30, 40, 50, 60 years of trauma. You're not going to undo that in one weekend workshop, right? It takes some time, and the name of the game is integration, right? It's not about getting rid of your trauma, it's integrating it, becoming more embodied. Clearing out that trauma creates more space for true, authentic you, in the spirit of you, to embody this body that we have for a temporary time.
So in other words, if somebody had, say for instance, you wouldn't be, if they had terrible fear of roller coaster for some crazy reason, you wouldn't be trying to put their mind right back on that big roller coaster. You try to start it at a little wee hump first, right?
Exactly, exactly. Or learning skiing, going on the baby, like
Yeah,
the
a little.
slope. Yeah, absolutely.
So where do you operate out of? Where's your place? And
My office is on Roland Street, right across from the health unit.
okay.
1184 Roland in the Balmoral Business Center.
Okay. Mhm. What does it cost to start at this, and
So
how many sessions roughly would you say go in a?
That would depend on the individual and how much work they're willing to do on their own in between visits. Some people come once a month, some people come once or twice and they're on their way. I offer a community shake once a week on Monday evenings. So anyone that's done a class or has had a private session and they're doing a home practice, they can come and participate in a community shake. So if they want to share their experience, or they have some questions, or they've forgotten how to do the exercises, or just want to have a different experience, it's the same as yoga and meditation. You can have a beautiful practice at home, and then when you come together in community, it's a much deeper, richer experience, and this is very much the same. An introductory class costs $25. That's about an hour and a half. And that process I just described, when Penny asked, what to expect. And so those typically are offered on Saturday afternoons. Sometimes I do classes in the community as well when I'm invited to different studios or wellness centers to deliver a class. I do have a website with a subscribe button that I'm building a newsletter, that if there's anything new coming up, I can send out that information. But if you don't like to be on newsletter list, I also do have a Facebook page that you can check to see if there's any announcements or anything being upcoming. And the drop-in classes are $12, the community shake.
One picture had out there, some people couldn't do it because of their physical abilities or something, and emotional.
It could be restricted.
Like what if someone said they have a bad knee or something?
So I would wait for that to heal. So like if someone has an accident and their bones are healing kind of thing, it would be counterproductive to shake if you're waiting for your bone to set kind of thing. I have scoliosis and I do this without any issue. My father is 82, has had 2 back surgeries and a neck surgery in the last 5 years, and had had an abdominal aneurysm surgery 15 years ago. He had a knee replacement done last year. He's a mess. And I do this with him in his recliner. So there are ways to do it. I've worked with people with MS as well. There's ways to do it without, if it's challenging to get down on the floor, it can be done in a bed, it can be done in a recliner or in a chair. There's a lot of ways that you can adapt and modify. And I forgot to tell you the best part. After you've done this process about 10 or 12 times and that mechanism is established, you don't need to do the exercises anymore. You just lay down and the tremor will arrive, it'll show up. Yeah.
So
the
about people
exercise.
with emotional, mental state or something mentioned about this.
Yes, like so if someone is has a diagnosed mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar, if they're under someone's care and they're on medication and they're able to self-regulate, then that's something that they can do. But again, it needs to be under, you need to let your doctor know or your therapist know what you're doing so that they can also monitor.
Or somebody who had a private session.
Absolutely, yeah.
How long have you been involved in this?
2 years.
2 years?
I did my first tremor session 2 years ago, January. And my first session was with a trainer in Prince Edward Island. I did a session with her over Skype. So that's something that I'm starting to do now as well, working with people at a distance. You don't need to be in the same room to have a monitor and a camera. And when I work with David, that's also over Skype.
And which is a private session then?
Private session is $60 plus HST, so it comes to $68.20. And the classes are 25 and the community shakes are 12.
And what time of the day can you go anytime? Like, you run the,
For private session, I take appointments Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And then sometimes, like, I can make an appointment on a Monday or a Friday, but my online appointment scheduler allows for those 3 days. If you're not able to come within the allotted times, then just send me an email and then we'll set something up
is your nighttime
outside of those times.
sessions?
I could do nighttime sessions, yeah. Not
For groups, I mean.
For groups, they're in the evening. I can do evening, actually, again, I like to keep the group to 6 or maximum of 8. My space only allows for 6, but I've worked with groups up to 8 people. So I've been invited to people's homes. People, have invited their mom and kids and whatnot, and we've done classes, private classes in their home if they've got a home large enough to accommodate that. And with workplaces or communities, where there's a number of people that are available to come together. So I have the Saturdays and the Mondays like as a always available, but I'm certainly available to evenings and weekends to schedule more days. Yeah. Is that all the questions? Thank you so much. Those were great questions. Very detailed and specific. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all the stories that were shared as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Do you have any cards or
I do. I
numbers?
just realized that.